JT from No Code Founders. Welcome to the Bubble Responsive Engine webinar. So this is our first webinar in a series of webinars we're going to be running every 2 weeks with popular no-code tools. Today it's going to be Bubble, and we're joined by Nick Carroll, who is product manager at Bubble and was part of the team that built the responsive engine. So Nick's going to walk us through, give us an overview of the responsive engine and for some best practices on how to build with it. That's someone else joining. So then if we've got time at the end, we'll maybe have a Q&A session. This meeting is limited to 40 minutes, so we'll see how we go. But I won't take up any more time, and I'll pass over to you, Nick.
Awesome. Thanks, JT. Yeah, excited to be here. Thank you for having me. I guess before I dive in, maybe in the chat, is there anyone here that has not at least tried out the new responsive engine? Just to get a feel for kind of where everyone's at. Cool. Nice. So yeah, I figured would start with just kind of a brief introduction. There were a few important principles that kind of underscored our approach to building the new responsive engine, and then we would jump right into a Bubble app and actually build something to kind of talk through some of those principles in practice. Sweet. So let me share my screen. Have a few kind of basic slides here to talk through some of those principles. So yeah, the new responsive engine is really, I think, the kind of the best way to describe it is a new approach to building apps in Bubble. The legacy engine was built a long time ago under the idea that let's help users kind of get going really fast with a what you see is what you get type of interface, and then when we'll make best guess assumptions under the hood as to what they want that responsive behavior to be, and if they want to tweak our best guess assumptions, there'll be some controls that allow them to adjust that. And I think this worked really well for a while, but as our users got more sophisticated, as the product got more sophisticated, and as just the whole web development environment in general got more sophisticated, users were quickly running into the ceiling of making those best guess assumptions. And if there are any, experienced Bubble users here, I'm sure you're shaking your head like, yep, I've definitely bumped into some of the issues with the legacy responsive engine. So really, this was a ground up redesign of our responsive rendering engine. And there are a few main things that we wanted to kind of keep in mind when doing this. So one, we wanted to leverage modern technologies, right? Like since 2012 to now, a lot has changed in that ecosystem, and we have amazing technologies like CSS Flexbox and CSS Grid, which allow us to do really cool stuff under the kind of behind the scenes, like out of the box. And so we wanted to leverage that. Also, make sure these pages were performant. They weren't loaded down with JavaScript as the old engine was. The other thing is, the old engine kind of encouraged users to think about responsive later, right? Set up what you want your thing to look like in desktop mode or in just like only as a mobile web page, and then worry about how that responsive behavior is going to look like afterwards. But then by the time you get to that point, maybe your page is so complicated that making those tweaks becomes a nightmare. So we wanted to kind of encourage users to build responsive earlier. I think it's kind of hard to find web pages these days, especially on web apps, that you don't want to be responsive, right? Like, and maybe not responsive to screen size changes, but you might want it to be responsive in height based on data changing, for example. So that was one of the core tenets. The third was servicing explicit behavior to our users. So again, that the previous engine would try to make a lot of best guess assumptions to abstract away any complexity to kind of allow users to start building faster. And I think that did work for a while, as I mentioned earlier, but there quickly became a point where users weren't sure of like what we were doing under the hood versus what they wanted it to do. And so, we kind of felt our hypothesis for this was, well, if we make it explicit and we give users that control to kind of, control the behavior that they want, that would ultimately lead to something that is easier to learn and also better outcomes for their app. So moving on from that, this kind of worked out to be some new container layouts, adding in margins and padding, something that was kind of sorely missing before, and then taking a look at or kind of refactoring repeating groups to take advantage of this new responsive behavior. So, apologies if everyone here is already an expert in CSS, Flexbox, and Grid, but just to kind of recap real quick, Flexbox is a modern layout model. And so it kind of, those controls that they offer kind of determine how something, how a layout will flex along different axes. So you have a vertical axis and a horizontal axis. Horizontal is a row, vertical axis is a column. And then grid is kind of a two-dimensional. So we kind of like play around with different Flexbox controls and different grid controls to get the desired behavior that someone wants as their page or data resizes. And again, a really important note, if you use Webflow, like you kind of need to have a pretty decent understanding of Flexbox, or especially if you're hand coding, but we wanted to kind of remove that barrier, right? Let's leverage the power that Flexbox provides without needing people to understand what it is to be able to use it. So the way we abstracted this was in different container types. So like groups, pop-ups, repeating groups, things like that. It's kind of like foundation of bubble apps. We gave them container layout types, which would define the responsive behavior of the child elements inside of them. So a page is a container. If you set a container layout type, that will determine kind of like the base behavior of the child elements in that. And then if you put a container within that page, that container element has a type as well. And then that also determines behavior. So for example, you could have a column page, and then you would have a fixed group inside of that page. That page might resize gracefully, but that fixed group, that content on the page, will always stay the same size. So again, this kind of predictive, repeatable behavior. So the first, is fixed. It's what you see is what you get, right? It's not responsive. If you were to shrink that screen size, things would get cut off. So yeah, not anything too fancy here. It's just fixed height, fixed width. The next container type is the aligned to parent. So this is a kind of something that we came up with where you align your child content to different nonents. Nonents are like quadrants, but when you break a box up into 9. And so this allows you to do things like shown in this diagram, or allows you to have overlapping elements. And we'll get into kind of when you use an aligned to parent a little bit later. The next is a row container. Row container, it's like flex row. This is when you have child elements that are arranged horizontally, and then as things resize, that content will wrap, right? So there's no overlapping. You're kind of forcing things to wrap. And then the next is column, and this is when you want to align your child content vertically. So think about like a page is just like, it's a bunch of, like a normal web page is a column of rows, right? You have different divs that run down the page that as, content grows within it, it kind of pushes everything else down. There's no overlapping. And so that's the last column type. Margins and padding are super important for responsive layouts. Margins kind of define that extra space around an element and define the overall size. Padding defines the space inside of an element's borders and kind of like that margin you have between the content and then the border of the container or element. And then with repeating groups, we kind of changed the behavior a little bit. Before we had kind of different styles that you could choose, right? Do I want this to be vertical scrolling? Do I want it to be a fixed number of cells? Since we were moving on to a system of kind of more control, more prescriptive behavior, we wanted to expose that to the user. And so it became about, what do you want the behavior of the row to be? What do you want that minimum height, minimum width? Do you want that to be fixed or not? Allowing that to define kind of the repeating group behavior rather than some like 5 different buckets of behavior. Yeah, we don't need to go over that. But yeah, quick overview of new responsive. Any questions on anything I went through before we move on? Awesome. Cool. And so for this next part, I figured it would be fun to just dive right into a bubble app and just start building. So we can see how a lot of these principles that we talked about kind of works out in real life. And while I'm going through this build, if any questions pop up or anything doesn't make sense, or just feel free to jump in, whether in the chat or live. More than happy to kind of take this in whatever direction we find useful. So let me switch here 1 second. This is what I want. Can everyone see my screen? Should be a bubble app.
Yep.
All right, cool. So yeah, we'll create a new page right now. Since the new responsive engine is still in beta, it's an opt-in experience on a page level. So we'll create a new page here for this. And then we're going to have to upgrade it. So right here, you can see we have this little upgrade icon. We'll upgrade our page right away. And now we are using a new responsive page. So yeah, I thought it would be fun to build a just a quick sign up login form to kind of show you how we combine these different container layout types to get the desired responsive behavior we want. So starting off on the page level, I'll move zoom out of the way. Yeah, starting out on the page level, you can see we have this new tab called layout. So appearance is the same as before, as all of, background colors and things like that. And then on the layout tab, that's where we get to choose the container layout type, and we start playing around with more layout settings. So right now it's fixed. This means that this page is fixed at 960. If I'm looking at it on my phone, kind of too bad, it's going to be cut off. So instead, let's make this an align to parent, make it easy. Yeah, we'll keep this width. This is what it'll render at in the editor, but it can render at whatever the screen size is when you're previewing. So next thing, we'll want to add a group to the page. So let's change the color of the page so it's obvious what we're talking about here. Give this a nice gray, boring gray background. Awesome. So that's our page. And then we're going to want to build this sign up login form. So just start by drawing a group onto my page. By default, this is going to be fixed. But we want to change that. Let's make it, well, we'll do that in a second. So we know what we're referencing in this group. Let's give it a color. I'm just going to remove this style for now. Let's make it white. Cool. So awesome. We have, this is our group. This is where we're going to put all of our, this is where we're going to put our sign up form. And let's give it a border. Some modern roundness. Cool. Alrighty. And so, building before, we would just start dragging stuff in, kind of positioning it, with dragging and dropping and stuff like that, maybe inching it along with our keyboard controls to get it perfect. But one of the really cool things with the new responsive engine is how we can kind of like tell stuff where to lay out. So, right, like let's say, before in fixed mode, I would have like some text then I would add like an input, right? And then maybe I would need to do this again because I want this other label. Then I would copy this and right here, right? And you're kind of like aligning everything, snapping, trying to get it to work. I'll show you what this looks like. The responsive. So let's change this layout to a column. We're going to choose column here because, you know, this is a sign up form. It's a form, like our content's going to kind of be organized vertically. So first thing we'll want to do is give this form a title. So if we drop this in here, we see this snaps kind of to that upper left-hand side. And we see like, all right, cool. Our horizontal alignment of this child element is left aligned. If I change that to center, my text box is now moved to the center of its parent container. That and right aligned, right? So maybe for this form, we want this to be center aligned. And we see we have some more controls here, right? This text box is fixed width, 254. This element is fixed height. We're going to change that. So let's say this is going to be sign up form. Cool. I don't need this bounding box to be so big. So I can come in here, uncheck fixed width, set this to 0, and I'll fit width to content. That means this text box is only going to take up as much space as it needs to for this text here. And we'll do the same thing with the height because we don't really care about that anymore. Awesome. Oops. Oh, yeah. No, not fixed height. Awesome. So now our sign up form box is bounded by that. We like this. And then what else am I going to do? I want to have labels and I want to have input elements. So again, as you see, like as I add content to this page, it's stacking vertically, right? In order of how I've added it to the page. So let's do that one more time. Copy, paste. And then now we see, okay, well, I don't like this order. One cool thing with new responsive engine is we made the elements tree here allow you to drag and drop. So you're like, okay, well, I want this text to be above input B. Sweet. Now I can reorder it. And we'll do the same thing here. We don't want our, we don't want this box to be so big. This is a label. So 0, this kind of ends up being the default, right? Fit width to content. We want to fit height to content, and we're going to change this to name. Let's make this be email. And let's do this again. Cool, and we can use, again, the here to mess around. So name, email. Again, we'll fix these. Zero. Okay, what's the content? Cool. All right, this is a little redundant, but awesome. Cool. And we want this to read password. Let's make this fit with the content. Cool. Now let's change these things here. So this, let's say we want the min width to be 0, but we want it to stretch all the way, right? We want our input to like stretch the full width of the container. So all we need to do is 0 here, and it'll stretch to that infinite max width. If we click make this element fixed width, it'll instead look at the content or the min width number to know which to go to, right? 0, there's nothing in there. Let's have it stretch, and we'll do the same thing here. Cool. So now we have kind of the beginnings. Let's add a button in here too. If we draw it anywhere, it just adds to the bottom. So this button, let's do the same thing. We want to make this say, sign me up. And then actually this one, we might write a line and we'll say min width is cool. And then height, right, awesome. Cool, so now we're kind of getting something that kind of looks like a sign-up form here. We don't really love the spacing. And so that's, actually, let's make this thing stretch for now. Cool. So yeah, you know, if again, for those of you who have used kind of the legacy engine, you would be kind of like starting to drag and push things around to get that ideal spacing. This we can do more in a prescriptive way. So for example, we might say, okay, for this container, I don't like how everything is touching the edges, right? That looks kind of ugly. So we can go in here and start adjusting this parent container padding. So we can say, well, on the top, I want 30 pixels of space. On the bottom, I want 30 pixels of space. And maybe I want, you know, 15 and 15. I'm not a designer, so if this still looks ugly, it's not my fault, but this is just to show you. And so now all of a sudden, everything, you know, we now have that space on the side. It's looking a little bit more passable. And we didn't have to move anything around. They kind of, you know, that CSS is being applied and it's doing it for us. And the other thing you'll notice is we didn't have to change anything to have these inputs that were stretched to the outside start to respect that parent control. Because there's that padding there, this thing is just going to stretch to however much space it has, right? It has this infinite max width. So it means it'll stretch until it can't stretch anymore, in which case that is bumping up against these padding that we put on the container. If we were to say, oh, we want extra margin for some reason, right? I want to add 30 pixels of margin, you'll see that now that has moved in 30 pixels away from that edge. And again, feel free to stop me anytime if something's not making sense or you have a question about any of the controls, but yeah, I'm just gonna kind of keep building here. So we talked about padding, and then also like, I don't love, you know, I want there to be more spacing here. Like this looks bad. So first, let's kind of adjust the size of our things here. Oh, I can't change the size all at once. That's annoying. Height is 82. Let's do something a little more breathing room here. Yeah, but I don't like how everything is touching here. So another cool feature is gap spacing. So gap spacing kind of says like, hey, I want you to apply a uniform gap. And if I'm in a column parent container, I get row gap. So basically these are all rows, right? These are just kind of rows of content. If I apply a row gap, that's going to say, hey, between each of these rows, apply uniform spacing. So I could say, all right, I want to separate each thing by 15 pixels. Cool, automatically, boom. I didn't have to do anything but say that, and I've got this uniform spacing between everything. But I don't love how, right? Like, I don't want this space here. I want the space between this whole thing. And that's where we can start nesting stuff. So I might take a look, take this label and this input, and I am going to group these. And I'll group these in a column container because I want them to be arranged stacked vertically, right? I want that to stay. So if I do that, I can, again, this is a little annoying. We're working on kind of better defaults, but I can adjust the min width, and I'm not going to fit with the content anymore. And same thing with min height, 0. And since this is a parent group now of these two items, and it's a content, it's going to respect the height of these two things right here, right? And so that's when I set this min height to be 0, and I fit height to content. This parent group is just going to shrink so that it can just encompass its child content. And we can do the same thing right here and here, arrange group elements in a Yeah, it's not fit. 0, cool. And then let's do the same thing here. Awesome. Cool. Now I like this a little bit more, but I want a little bit of space here. So again, I can use the gap spacing and say, maybe give me 5 pixels, right? And I love this gap spacing. It makes building forms so much easier because you just group stuff and hit the gap spacing. I don't even need to worry about adding margin to my input. I can just go. So now I have something, hey, that looks passable, right? And maybe I decide like, I don't really like this. I want more space on the side. I can just jump right into this parent container and say, hey, give me more padding on the left and the right side. So I might want this to be 30, this to be 30. Okay, cool. That looks a little bit better. That's a little bit cleaner. Similarly, if I say, I want this to be bigger, right? Like this should be, there we go. I didn't have to touch any other settings to have it kind of like automatically adjust. And again, because we established rules that said, hey, like this bounding box, right? Just fit width to content, fit height to content, just grow as big as it needs to be to encapsulate that. And then since these things are not allowed to overlap, but they stack vertically and we have this gap, it's just going to push everything down as it needed to be so that everything fits. And this is where like you can start to see the power of the new responsive engine, is because you set these rules and then they stay true, for as long as you want them to be. Let me jump into the chat at this point. I see there are a few questions. What are the width, min width, and min height standards in the industry? Yeah, that's a great question. I don't know if there are like standards, like as far as like what like kind of basic CSS settings would be. Like I find in Bubble, if you want something to fit width to content, like a text box, like 0 and infinite max width, and just fit width to content, right? Something that I want to stretch, I'll still do that 0. I might change that min width if I want to, like, I don't want it to get any smaller, right? So this input, if I go into my responsive tab here, okay, cool, that looks really good at 768. If I go to 320, it starts to get cut off a little bit. This is probably because I have a minimum width set here. Yeah. Oh, I don't want that to be. Maybe I want this to be a minimum width of 300. I'm going to fit width to content. Actually, no, I'm not going to do that. And then min height. 0. Cool. Yeah, we can see this starts to look better. And then for min height, I think it kind of depends on the design system. Like I think Material, it's like 62 pixels. They are their inputs, but they also have like their headers, like sometimes inside. So I think it kind of just depends on your design system. I don't know if there are, and there might be. I'm not a designer, so apologies there. Looking at this next one, suggestion is when you select fit width to content is to remove the set size values at that point in time. Yeah. There's definitely some work to be done around better defaults, because like there might be times where I want a minimum width and I'm fitting width to content, right? Like I just don't want it to get any smaller than a certain amount. But if I'm fitting to like text and that text might be dynamic, there might not be a reason for me to want a min width. Can't you control press and edit multiple elements at the same time? I believe so. Yeah. You should be able to. I think it's not everything is accessible. I think it's depending on the elements you selected. Certain things are able to be changed, with multiple elements, and some things are not. We're looking to expand this to everything that's reasonable. So, for example, you see here like size is not available because their size is controlled by the min, max width, and like fit width the content, right? So it wouldn't make sense to have size. Now it would make sense to have those layout controls available in here. And so that's a change that we're looking to make. But for right now, margin is kind of the only thing that you can do together, depending on your settings. Yeah, so another thing right now, you can't set up any layout settings in a style yet. It's something that we're adding soon, because like right here, right, I have said 0, infinite, right, make it fixed height at 52. Like I would love for this to be a style, right? So then I can open up my next input and say, hey, apply that style. So that's something that we're looking into, but it's not there yet.
Sorry to interrupt, but we're about to run out of time.
Gotcha.
So we can start another session to deal with the last few Q&As if you want to. If everyone wants to just leave this one and click the link again to join. Would that work?
Sure. Yeah, just to address that, the page settings. Yeah, so we kind of use, these are pretty common breakpoints, 320, 768. This is mobile, like horizontal. This is a template, tablet. And then 1200 is kind of your like standard desktop minimum. So these are kind of industry standards. 320 is the smallest mobile screen that is available on the market. That is not a watch. So but yeah, designing in desktop will usually do 1200. Yeah, I hope that answers